know the why human trafficking work is needed, to fight for the freedom of modern-day slaves. But love, passion, commitment isn't all you need to be an effective and successful anti-trafficking advocate. Learn the how. I'm Dr. Celia Williamson, Director of the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute at the University of Toledo. Welcome to the Emancipation Nation podcast, where I'll provide you with the latest and best methods, policy, and practice discussed by experienced experts in the field so that you can cut through the noise, save time, and be about the work of saving lives. Welcome to the Emancipation Nation episode 159. I'm Dr. Celia Williamson, and I want to read you the description of a book. And it says, born into poverty and violence, Lora's early life was one of extreme vulnerability. She was prostituted for the first time at the age of 9 and suffered unspeakable treatment from those who should have protected her. Early trauma led her to institutionalization soon after she started college. And incarceration she would have not survived, but for the courageous nurse who fought for her release. 50 years later, with an advanced degree in psychology and a long, successful career as a mental health professional, a leading educator and sought-out public speaker, Lora revisited the grounds of the Illinois State Mental Hospital, where she was once kept in inhumane, degrading, and life-threatening circumstances. This profound and compelling memoir traces her life as a survivor of child abuse, sex trafficking, illegal pharmacological drug research, and institutional abuse. Lora's experiences illuminate and validate the power of love and the strength of the indomitable human spirit that lives within each of us. Lora is here today to talk about her life, her experiences, her survival, and her book. It's an honor to have you here. So welcome, Lora.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
It's just amazing just reading that little description of your life that you survived, but not only survived, but you thrived to become a professional in psychology, to have a successful mental health career, to be an educator, to write a book and be a public speaker. You really have a story to tell. Can you take us back and sort of give us an idea without giving away all of the book, because I'm kind of interested to read it myself, but just, how did this start? How did you become a victim of child abuse in the first place?
I have to start by telling you a little bit about my mother's history. When she was 3, she lived in northern Wisconsin on a farm, and her father froze to death in a blizzard. And her mother became catatonic, couldn't move, couldn't interact with her own children, couldn't bathe herself or feed herself. And it was during the Depression, the worst years of the Depression. And so the older sister had to walk into town and get a job, which left my grandmother and my mother and her other siblings, and my mother was 3 at the time, and there was a brand new baby, in the care of 2 young adolescent boys. And they couldn't hardly take care of themselves, let alone their siblings. So there was chaos. There was a lot of sexual abuse. I suspect some of it was in seeking comfort. And what ended up happening is, I think my mother's life, she literally stalled out at age 3. She wasn't parented from 3 on. And my grandmother never, she eventually got to the point where she could talk a bit and move, etc., but she never lived alone. She was never functional, and she couldn't even remember the name of her own children, let alone her grandchildren. So my mother literally stopped being parented. So I was born out of wedlock. My aunts used to say that it could have been any Tom, Dick, or Harry or Clinton, and they were pretty certain it was my uncle. And so that was the start. My mother got her first pair of shoes by climbing out of a window and having sex with a local farmhand, and got money for that. And I believe in her life, the prostitution was a way she was dealing with her own trauma. And then as you said, as you read earlier, I was trafficked. And of course, it wasn't called that in those days. It was called prostituted by my mother the first time when I was 9. And I can remember her sitting and watching it happen and was horrified. The man was there. She insisted on watching. She was sitting in a nearby chair. And I realized in that moment she wasn't really there.
Mm-hmm.
She was staring off into space. I think my mother was highly dissociative.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it was, even the selling of me was somehow, I believe, a way to heal her own trauma, to make sense of it, even though it sounded kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, for a lot of years, in my younger life, I was eventually taken away from my mother by the courts and in and out of different placements. But there was a point where I knew that I had always loved my mother and still loved my mother. And it was when I met with my mom's oldest sister, the one who went into town and started working on the weekends and during the week, and coming out to the farm only once or twice a week to bring food, that she was willing to tell me everything. And so that's where I learned about the history. And at that point, I was able to forgive my mother.
Wow.
And it really, now what I know about trauma and have experienced myself and know from so many others I've worked with, including local trafficking survivors, I think often they're compelled, and it's often deeply unconscious, by their own trauma. It's like trauma reenactment.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that my mother prostituted herself because she felt powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It was the only way she knew how to feel powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
there was something in and I would watch her. When I was young, she would take me with her, and I'd often be in bars with her, and often in the back seat of the car while she was having sex with someone she had picked up.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember this feeling of, she was very aggressive, and she was very, she would get really excited in the dance of seduction. And I think that's where she found her power in the only way she knew how.
That's very interesting. And so, how did you then move from that situation to become institutionalized?
Well, I'd been given 2 scholarships to go off to college. I was homeless um, for the month before, a little over a month, probably a couple of months before I left for college, and wasn't prepared. I had some street sense, but I didn't have any daily living skills, and I'd been in a number of placements. And back then, this was pre-child protection years, so they didn't even have certified foster homes. They just kept putting me with people who I learned often take kids for the wrong reason, and I think that still goes on today. So I showed up at school with 2 suitcases that were given to me by a doctor at the local county hospital, because I worked there as a nursing assistant that summer. And I started being stalked by the respiratory therapist where I was working as a nursing assistant on the weekend. And he terrified me. He pulled me into room closets. He started showing up in the halls at school. He was 50 some years old.
Oh,
And
wow.
he showed up at the bottom of the L stop. I was living in Chicago going to school, and tried to pull me into his car. And I don't know what would have happened had a businessman coming down the steps not scared him away. So I quit my job and I went into a really funky blue place. And the dorms were closing in several weeks. Now I didn't have a job. I had no money and I had nowhere to go.
Mm.
And so my old childhood default was to say, well, I could just take some pills and be over with it. So I took I think it was a handful of aspirin or a couple handfuls of aspirin. And then I thought, that was really stupid. I don't want to die. And I made myself throw up. And I went and saw the dorm mother, and she had me, said that she could help me find a job for the summer. She was glad I told her, but she wanted me to be checked out medically. So she put me in a taxi. I was sent across town to an emergency room. And next thing you know, they told me they were sending me across town to another hospital called Illinois State Psychiatric Institute, where I didn't know it at the time, they were doing drug research. And I was put on a ward for young adults who had no family members. and I wouldn't take the drugs. So I was eventually committed to the worst state hospital in the system. And had it not been for Dr. Sidney Krampitz, she wasn't a doctor at the time. She was actually getting her master's degree in nursing. I wouldn't have survived that system.
We're going to take a short break and tell you about an amazing conference that we host every year.
Over the past 19 years, the International Human Trafficking and Social Justice Conference has welcomed thousands of attendees from all 50 states and from 47 countries. We are the largest and oldest academic conference on human trafficking in the world. Our 19th annual conference will be hosted virtually this year on September 21st through the 23rd. You will have the opportunity to learn from and collaborate with thousands of advocates, researchers, providers, and survivors from across the globe. This will be our largest conference to date, with over 110 breakout sessions featuring 175 expert presenters speaking about various topics related to human trafficking and social justice issues. Make sure you are part of the conversation and don't miss out. Find out more and register today on our website, traffickingconference.com.
And I almost did die there.
Wow. And so how long did you stay in that system?
15 months. Sydney had worked at the first hospital and was just furious about my commitment and vowed that she would do everything in her power to get me out. But at that point, from where she lived to the hospital was about a 3.5-hour drive. And she's a graduate student, has 3 small children at home, and is a Lutheran minister's wife, and only available, one day a week, usually Sundays. And she kept telling herself that I was a bright college student and I'd probably been released. And finally, after about 8 or 9 months, she said she just couldn't get me off her mind and heart. And she decided to call to make sure I had been released, and was astounded that I was still there. And then she came week after week and after week and did everything she could to advocate to get me out, everything, including threatening to have them sued.
Wow, the power of just one person that invests in someone else's life. That changed the entire trajectory of your life. When you got out of the institution, where did you go from there?
I went to a cousin's for a couple of months. And because I had to be discharged to a legal relative. And so she was a brand new bride with a brand new baby, but she took me for a couple of months and then I went back to school.
Why did you have to be discharged to a legal family?
I have no idea. Sidney Krampitz wanted to take me and they said no, that it had to be a legal relative. I don't know the answer to that. I guess supposedly it was the law back in those days.
Wow. And so you go to the relative's house, and then where do you go from there? How do you get to college?
I go back to the same college I'd been going to. And because I'd been a patient in a state hospital, I was eligible for what's called DVR, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. And so they because now my scholarships were gone, but then they helped with school expenses, etc. Mm-hmm. So I was able to get back into college. The other thing that I'd like to pick up on what you said about the power of someone to change your life, that's woven throughout my whole story. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had my first suicide attempt at age 9, and had it not been for a neighbor upstairs who was kind to me, the day she was moving away, she pulled me into her arms. I was sobbing and begging her not to move. I mean, before that, I felt like an alien. I didn't know why anyone could possibly want to live here, because I didn't know any adults who liked kids or were decent to kids. Mm-hmm. And she pulled me into her arms as I'm sobbing, begging her not to leave, and just kept murmuring, "I love you. I love you. You're a good girl." And I had not heard the word love, didn't know what that meant, but I felt it in my body. And it was like this sense of awe. And I felt like I had a spiritual epiphany. And I remember saying, that's why I was born, to learn how to love, learn how to give it and receive it. And that became a guiding light from then on.
But up until age 9, you had never heard the word, didn't know anything about the concept.
No.
But in this moment, you felt that
Right.
Your world was bigger. The universe was purposeful. There was a purpose.
Absolutely.
And so throughout your life, you've had these people
Yes.
sort of show you grace.
That's absolutely. Absolutely. And often they'd show up in the darkest times. And, I found when I work with other survivors or people who've been traumatized in different ways, trauma eclipses the nervous system. It takes over. And so we're always hypervigilant, waiting for the next shoe to drop until we're healed. And I had a spiritual teacher many years ago, a Native American woman named Dahani Oahu. And I had the great gift of living on her land for a month and being part of something called Women in Transformation. And one day, Dahani looked at me and she said, and we had to write an extensive essay about our life before we got admitted to this program. And she said to me, Lora, I want you to look back in your life and do a timeline and find all the joy markers, because you wouldn't have survived. You wouldn't be on this planet had there not been some. And so then I went back in history and I thought, oh, and that person, and that person, and that person.
Mm.
And I always recommend survivors do that exercise, because it's so easy for the traumatized brain to just take over, and it eclipses every other good part of our life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's some wisdom there. I mean, those are jewels. I mean, what you're doing is dropping jewels, and I hope people are picking them up and putting them in their crown, because these are jewels through life. And so what attracted you to clinical psychology and mental health?
Well, I originally was in education, and I worked with both children with emotional problems as well as with deafblind children. And I found that I worked the best with those that were the most troubled. And a boss noticed that. And she dared me to try going to graduate school that summer, because we were off during the summer. I was working in a residential treatment program for deafblind children. And I went just absolutely believing with all my heart that I wasn't smart enough to be in graduate school, because I hadn't learned to read till the end of third grade. And had it been not for the kindness of a substitute teacher, I might not have ever read, because they'd given up on me. And so I became a voracious reader after that. And so Marge, my supervisor, really pushed me to try some graduate school courses that summer, and I never left. And I think I believed at that point that everything that happened to me was about me, that there was something wrong with me, that those things had happened. And so I think I was intrigued about what I might learn about psychology. I didn't know that there were systemic fault lines and cracks in the system at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And but I believed that everything that happened was my fault. Mm-hmm. And I thrived in graduate school. I ended up graduating with straight A's and loved what I did. I've always worked out of the box. I got trained how to work with children and families as well as with adults. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I got there. I think it was curiosity, trying to, in part, even though it wasn't fully conscious, solve this puzzle of myself. Mm-hmm. I had vowed when I was finally released from Elgin State Hospital that no matter what it took, I would not live my life with a leftover mental health diagnosis. None of them were accurate in the first place, but I would not live my life that way. So determined to do everything I could. And I think education was a part of that.
Mm-hmm. And I think, a lot of us go to college and partly we go into these helping professionals to understand. We have to make sense of our lives and why this happened. We have to learn about human behavior, and we don't let it sit inside of us. We go back and we help others. And that's really what I see you doing. And so what made you go back to the grounds of the mental hospital? Why would you do that?
It was intuition. And I always listened to my intuition. And I knew that I needed to go back. Mm-hmm. And I also knew that I needed, as I was writing the book, needed to do some research, because I needed to know more. And Sydney Krampitz and I were in touch by then, the woman who'd gotten me out. And we were talking about every 2 weeks. And I said, I decided to go back. And she says, then I'm coming with you, which was wonderful because I think I didn't know that I needed someone to go with me, but I really did.
Mm.
And so she went with me, and we went to the archival library in Springfield, Illinois. And I found a document this thick that to this day I haven't been able to read it straight through, but Sydney read it every single night and then would talk a little bit about it. And it has everything from autopsy reports to the deaths that occurred there, because there had been an investigation, because people who had families were like shocked when their loved one had died unexpectedly, and they had no illness, nothing was wrong with them. And what I found is one of the primary drugs they were giving everyone was Thorazine, which they were giving me as well, which was an antipsychotic, even though I wasn't psychotic.
Mm.
And Thorazine causes huge constipation and eventually bowel obstructions. So many people had died there of sepsis from bowel ruptures.
Oh, wow.
And I've been as well as other things, and I've been told that it's miraculous that I survived.
Mm.
And I think going back there helped me to resolve a number of things, including I wanted to visit the grave of someone who I knew who had committed suicide while they were there.
And did you had built a relationship with this person that committed
Yes.
suicide eventually?
She was at the first hospital I was at. Her name was Mary, and she was a brilliant concert pianist who had a seizure disorder. So she had a suicide attempt, and that's what got her into the first hospital I was in. And then, I don't know, maybe a month or weeks later, she was also committed to Elgin, and she was in the same unit I was in for a while. But I can't even tell you the way she played the piano, and they had one on the ward at ISPI, was angelic. And people would be upset in the ward, and she'd just go to the piano and start playing, and everybody would settle. And I think she did that to settle herself. But in those days, they didn't have much they could do for people who had seizures. And so she ended up, they moved her from the ward I was in to a medical ward, which is the most awful building I had ever walked into. It had probably 150 adult-sized cribs lined up. You could hardly walk between them, with people who were non-functional and overdrugged. And she actually told me and showed me the pills that she had saved. And I got a grounds pass and got to see her one other time. And the nurse had told me she'd committed suicide. And so she was buried at the cemetery in Elgin because no family claimed her. And so I wanted to honor her by going back to the cemetery.
Wow. So this hospital is experimenting with people with very minor medical issues. I mean, you took a couple of handfuls of aspirin, or these are not mental health conditions. Did anybody bring any lawsuits against this facility?
Not that I'm aware of. And Illinois State Psychiatric Institute, there's actually a whole book written about it. That talks about them. They did not hide their research.
Wow. Is that facility closed now?
Yes, it is. It's closed now. Elgin, the second hospital, the state hospital I was in, is still open, but they only have a population of 300 now, and it's a forensic hospital. And I actually returned once more. That's not in the book because that was actually about a month ago. I was coming back from Indianapolis, and a friend was driving with me, and we both had to use the rest area. And we got off the freeway, and there's a sign, Elgin State Hospital. And so the man who took Sydney and I around to the hospital and took us to the cemetery, I called him to see if he was available, and he said, let's meet for lunch. And so we met and had a wonderful lunch together. And then I went back through the hospital, and they told me about how it's changed even since I had been there about 7 years ago with Sydney. And his wife had worked there as well.
Wow. I mean, these are crimes against humanity. I can't believe that you survived. And your friend Sydney has been traveling with you through these years. So how many years have you all been friends?
Well, she's known me since I was 18. And we lost track of each other for a while when cell phones came into fashion and people stopped having home telephone numbers. But while I was writing the book early on, I knew I had to find her again. And I was able to find her. I remembered her daughters' names and was able to find her through Facebook and through her daughters.
So
And
at least decades you've been friends.
absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, she came when I went to graduate school, she came to my graduation.
Wow, what a wonderful person. And so a little bit ago, you said you rely on your intuition. How did you even learn to begin to rely on yourself, given all your experiences?
You know, I believe that I don't know how to explain it. I've always, like as a kid, there were things spiritually related that happened to me. One day I wandered, I ran wild. I was like a feral kid. My mom could care less if I was home and often told me to get out of her sight. She couldn't stand to look at me. So I wandered. I didn't have a bedtime. I didn't have a time I had to come in. I didn't get called in from play like other kids at dark. So I wandered a lot. And one Saturday I wandered into the local Catholic church and I heard singing and it was in Latin. So I didn't know what they were saying, but I was so drawn to the music. I went and sat in the stairwell because they were in the choir above. And I felt like God was raining down on me. And after that, I visited all the churches in town when they had choir practice. And that created a respite. In about second grade, I started doing this thing, and it was like an experiment. And I would send my energy out and try to figure out whether my mom had a man there, or whether she was alone, or whether she was drunk or sober, which would help determine whether I should go straight home or just go wander. And I got really good at it. I don't know how. I just got good at it, and I was 9 times out of 10 right.
Wow, you became very self-reliant.
Right. And I think I became a pretty mystical kid, and I was drawn to the saints. I remember reading all the lives of the saints. And I'd had a signature moment when I was 3 years old. And I think that's what probably shaped some of that. And my uncle Clinton, my mom was living with him. They were living as husband and wife, and he shot himself in front of my mother and I. He had come back from World War II, a pretty damaged human being. And my mother beat the crap out of me and left me alone. And there was a raging blizzard starting. And I eventually got out of the bed she'd thrown me in and went downstairs looking for food. And his body had been removed because my aunt had come looking for us because we were supposed to be there for dinner and hadn't shown up. And I tried to get out the front door, and a huge drift of snow came in. So now I could neither get out nor could I close the door. And I'm sitting on the floor sobbing with the snow drifting in and starting to shiver. And I had what I believe with all my heart and trust as true, a visitation of an ethereal presence.
Wow.
And I remember the sound of the voice, which told me to go back upstairs on my bottom and get back in my bed and cover up, and that she'd be taking care of me. And I didn't know, of course, as a 3-year-old, and it wasn't till my aunt told me, I actually had a dislocated arm and broken collarbone. So it makes perfect sense why she told me to go up the stairs backwards. I knew that I was in pain, but and something was wrong with my left arm, but I had no idea what it was.
And this all took place in a matter of hours. He gets shot, you get beaten. Wow.
I would say it was hours later because his body was removed that day. And it might have even been the next day that I got out of the crib. I don't know.
That's amazing.
But I there's something that connects me to all that is. And of course, we all use different languages for that, and I use different words for that myself. Sometimes God, sometimes mystery, sometimes all that is. But I trust that aspect of us, and I think that that's what has survived. I think it's the essence of who we each are, and I think love is why we're all here. And I believe that I wrote the book as an act of love and as a way to speak for those who've not had a voice.
I think it's all about being attracted to love and light. And
Yes.
so tell us a little bit about the book.
The book starts with me being committed to Elgin, and then it goes backwards in time. So it leaves people with the question, what happened to her? Did she ever get out? And so then I trace my mother's life as well as the trajectory of my childhood and young adulthood. But the whole, I would say, second part of the book is about the ability to transcend and fully heal from trauma, to literally to transform. And another reason I wrote the book is I think often people who are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder believe that it's a life sentence, that they can never overcome it or get over it. And I want to tell you, I'm a poster child to the fact that that's not true. That we can overcome it if we make a solid commitment to do so. We can work through all the trauma, and we can be fully free, and live a thriving, luminous life as I do.
Now, how did you work through trauma, and how do you go about life today?
I saw a therapist for many years who, back in those years, they took you back into the trauma. They did what's called abreactions. We now know that unless that's absolutely necessary for some reason, it's like having a flashback. That is not the best way to do trauma therapy because it re-traumatizes the brain. But that's what we knew, and that's what we did back then. I mean, we were just beginning to understand professionally what post-traumatic stress disorder is. So I did a lot of therapy. I also intuitively knew that I needed to learn to meditate and needed a spiritual practice. And Dahani Oahu, the Cherokee elder that I told you about, was my first teacher. And so I always had that parallel experience. And I think that's essential. And part of my mission is to really empower and illuminate the fact to healthcare professionals that trauma creates a existential crisis. And those are the kind of crises in which we ask the big questions. What's the purpose of life? Will I ever be the same? Why did this happen to me? And that can't be solved psychologically. It has to be met and solved spiritually as well as psychologically. And so there has to be a coming together of spirituality and psychotherapy. And I think we're in a time where there's a lot more openness to that. And we're all spiritual beings. You know, what we choose to practice or how we choose to practice or to learn in community can often be about religion, which are containers, but we are all spiritual in nature. And I've continued to have a spiritual teacher. I've had many over the years, and that's changed as I've grown and deepened. I also knew intuitively that I needed to do body work long before the book called The Body Keeps the Score was ever written, and found an incredible body worker, this quiet Jewish woman who was doing amazing energy work many, many years ago. And she worked with me and helped with some of that. I still do body work.
I think appreciating and respecting the various ways of knowing from thousands of years across cultures. Sometimes we think just Western medicine and Western ways of knowing or psychology, and those are the ways that you heal people. Right. And we don't often give respect to those other ways of knowing. And I think those are critical mistakes that we make.
Absolutely.
And, there is a religion, spirituality, humanitarianism, whatever it is that connects you to things outside of you, bigger than you. Absolutely. That is so important to healing.
Absolutely. It's critical. It's critical. And I did a talk to a group of psychiatrists recently, and I said, you've got to start letting the essence of the person into the room by even asking the questions. What makes your heart sing? What gives you joy? What shifts your mood when you're having a bad day?
Yes.
And I was great. I was so grateful. It was well received. And they said, well, we need a coach. When can you help us?
Oh, awesome.
Phenomenal. Yes. So that's part of my mission as well. The other thing is, I believe that, you know, practice is like practicing gratitude, because that shifts our hormones,
Mhm.
is really important.
Yeah.
And I was working with a client once who was very, very depressed and pretty hopeless. And I gave her the assignment. All she had to do is like one thing she was grateful for every evening.
Mhm.
And suddenly she has a whole notebook, and you could watch every day her attitude shift. I
Yeah.
did that recently with my 10-year-old granddaughter who was having a bad day. And I said, we're going to play the gratitude game. And a friend was with me. So we just went around in a circle and kept naming all the things we were grateful for. And she got out of her bad mood.
Absolutely. Well,
Sure.
and what's the name of your book? Tell everybody what the name of the book is.
It's called Darkness Was My Candle, An Odyssey of Survival and Grace.
Awesome. And then what by Lora DeVore? And where can
Yeah.
people pick up the book?
And almost any place you can order a book. They can order books for you, but it's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And let's see where else. Target, I've been told. So just about any place you can get a book or order a book.
Awesome. And I think reading your story just reminds us to practice gratitude for our lives.
That's
So I
right.
think that is a good introduction to how to show grace and practice gratitude yourself. It's just an amazing story, and you're an amazing human. And just to look at you, the feeling, the presence of you is just having someone that is very calm, a very calm, welcoming presence. So thank you for that. And thank you for sharing your book with the world. And I hope that many people read it. And I'm definitely one that can't wait to read it. So thank you so much, Laura DeVore. Is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience? You know, we're trying to do our best to help people that have been traumatized and victimized in various ways. One of them is trafficking, but victimization through violence and, traumatized. Any recommendations or advice that you'd like to give the audience who are trying to help people that have perhaps experienced some of what you've experienced?
One of the things I'd like to recommend is people go to the website, which is loradevore.com. And it actually has an interview between Sydney Krampus and I, which was last November. And it was 2 weeks before she passed away. And so I'm very grateful for that. The other thing is, know with all your heart, believe in yourself, that if you got through the unspeakable, you can get through healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I have resources, on a whole list of resources on the website of amazing people who can help.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all around the country. Many of them, work with people remotely. And also know that what happened to you perhaps happened for a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can bring out your magnificence
Mm-hmm.
and your love. You're alive for a reason.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
begin to feed that aspect of you, and begin to feed your spiritual nature, and know that we're all connected, and all human beings suffer in one way or another. And sometimes the most angry, rageful people, my mother was also a rageaholic. Under that, she suffered so much. When
Mm-hmm.
she died, I felt profound grief, not because of losing her, because she couldn't relate. She
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a person who could relate to me. There was no connection. She'd never bonded with me. But I had profound grief, because here was a woman who had never fully lived a life.
Wow. Yeah.
So I really want people to believe in themselves and believe that they can recover. And I want those who work with survivors to know that sometimes you can't walk an entire journey with people, but by the nature of your presence, you can change the course of their life.
Absolutely. And Sydney walked alongside you, served a grand purpose. And I'm sorry to hear that she passed.
Yeah.
But
the Dale, the woman who held me in her arms when I was a 7-year-old. I wrote a short story about her years ago, and then I found her, and I got to be with her when she passed away.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
I saw her several weeks before, and I started to cry, and I said, I'm so sorry it took me so long to find you, Dale. We've missed so much time together. She'd never forgotten me, and I'd never forgotten her. And she said, don't be sorry, because you did find me. Now I'm not afraid to die, because I know I did one good thing in my life.
Oh,
Just
that's
look at you, you're like a ripple that goes out.
awesome.
And then I got to be with her when she died.
And to be able to evolve as a human being, to return, to open your heart to understand why someone may have been cold to you or victimized you or been distant from you, like your mother, being able to understand her circumstances and experiences and having some empathy for what she was able to give and what she was not able to give. And that's somebody that is an evolved human for sure. Well, thank you so much. And it's just been a pleasure talking to you. And I hope people do buy the book, because I think there's a lot in it that they can take away in their own lives, as well as make them sensitive to people who've been victimized and to those people who victimize. It helps us to try to understand where they came from and what they had to offer and what they didn't have to offer. So thank you so much once again, Lora, and I hope you continue on this journey and bringing love and light into other people's lives. So thank you so much. That was Lora DeVore and her amazing story that she chronicled in her book, Darkness Was My Candle, An Odyssey of Survival and Grace. And you can go to her website to find out all kinds of great information that she has there for you if you're a survivor, or for you as an advocate to learn more. And that's at loradevore.com, Lora, and DeVore is spelled DE, V as in Victor, ORE.com. So much to talk about, that so much to unpack. I can't even speak on all of it because we'll be here for days. But I do want to say that one of my takeaways from this episode is really the power of advocacy. You know, we're not in someone's life. As Lora said, we may not walk the whole journey with someone, but don't mistake the power of change, the power of your presence in someone's life, even if it's for a brief moment, even if it's like her neighbor that was able to hug her and say, you are good. I love you. For her to hear you are good and someone loves you. You never know if someone has never heard that before, or rarely heard it, or didn't hear it from someone who is not looking to get anything from somebody else, or someone like Sydney, who was in her life for a very long time, lost touch, and then got into her life again. You never know if those small moments make a big difference, or if those extended moments make a big difference. It's sort of like when people talk about the tree being a symbol of engagement in our life. You know, people that are roots of your tree. Well, those people, those roots will be in your life for a very long time, maybe a lifetime. But there are also branches on the tree, and branches are strong and they're there for a time, and branches break away. And that's what happens to a tree. And that's a natural progression of the life of that tree. And then there are leaves on the tree, and the leaves are there for a season. And so that's what people say. Who are the leaves in your life, and who are the roots, and who are the branches? And each one of those people in your life, whether they're there for a moment, like a leaf, or whether they're there for a lifetime, like a root, can make a tremendous impact on somebody's life. I think the other thing that she talked about was spirituality and
belief in something bigger than yourself, outside of yourself. And maybe it's a religion, like she talked about religious containers that give you structure. Or maybe it's outside of any of those religious containers and it's a spirituality. It's something that you believe in that's larger and powerful. Having something outside yourself is critical to healing. She talked about it from a professional stance and also from somebody that had personal experience, that using the tools and the methods of psychology are critical to healing, and also having a spiritual understanding, a mindfulness about your experience, because the trauma, the crisis is going to lead to those existential questions. Why am I here? What is life about? Why did I have to experience that? And when you ask those type of questions, it's difficult for psychology or any type of scholarly knowledge to respond to those type of questions. And whether your religion or your spirituality is contained within a religion, or whether it is a more free-flowing spiritual experience, doesn't matter, as long as you're connected in a way that gives you that type of internal healing and that helps you answer those larger questions. My spirituality is going into the woods and hiking and seeing the trees and the grass and the water. To me, that's my church. That's my spirituality. That's where I connect. And that's where I answer those questions, those larger questions that need to be answered for me. And wow, can you just imagine for a moment someone's life as a child that had never heard until much later someone say, I love you, you're good, you're a good person. And then to have taken 2 handfuls of aspirin and end up for over a year in an institution where you are heavily medicated, dangerously medicated, and to have an advocate who couldn't get you off their mind, by the way, to come back and to fight for you. It's so true. There are moments in your life where people have stepped in to help you. And so being an advocate for someone else, stepping in for someone else, even though it's for a moment or for a long period of time, can be critical, life-altering, life-changing for someone else. Being an advocate is so critically important. And if that's inside of you and you can't shake it and it whispers to you all day long, then that is the path that you should travel, to fight for somebody else. If that's right for you, then no teacher, no preacher, no parent, no friend, no wise person can decide what's right for you. Just listen to that voice inside you that says, I need to do this. I need to speak up right now on this person's behalf. I need to say this to this person in this moment. I need to circle back because I need to find out how this person's doing. I need to stand up. I need to step up. I need to speak up. That's what a good advocate does. And if I could say, if the spirit moves you, then do that for somebody else. Until next time, the fight continues.
Let's not just do something, let's do the best thing. If you like this episode of Emancipation Nation, please subscribe and I'll send you the weekly podcast Until then, the fight continues.